The glass shattered against the wall 3 inches from my head, and I didn't even flinch. That's how I knew something inside me had finally died. I stood there in the hallway of our $800,000 home, watching red wine drip slowly down the cream-coloured paint, and I felt nothing. No fear, no tears, just a cold, quiet clarity that settled over me like the first frost of November. My husband was still screaming something about dinner being late, about how I had embarrassed him in front of his colleagues at the firm's anniversary party, about how I was ungrateful and stupid and lucky he had ever chosen me. His voice echoed off the vaulted ceilings of the beautiful house he reminded me every week that he paid for. I looked at him, really looked at him, and I made a decision. He just didn't know it yet. 48 hours earlier, everything had seemed fine. Or at least, that was the version I showed the world. My name is Claire. I'm 38 years old. And for the past 6 years, I had been living a very convincing lie. The lie that my marriage was good. The lie that my husband was a successful, respected man who loved me. The lie that I was happy. My husband and I had met when I was 32, working as a middle school science teacher in Scottsdale, Arizona. I had gone to my college roommate's engagement party on a warm October evening, wearing a green dress I'd bought on clearance and heels that were already making my feet ache. I wasn't expecting anything from that night. I was tired from a long week of grading lab reports and managing 30 teenagers who would rather be anywhere else than learning about photosynthesis. He had walked up to me at the bar, tall and confident in a charcoal suit, and said he had been watching me all evening because I was the only person in the room who looked like they were genuinely enjoying themselves. I laughed at that. I had been on my 3rd glass of wine and arguing cheerfully with the bartender about whether Arizona iced tea actually originated in Arizona. He laughed too. His name was Daniel, he told me. He was a senior financial advisor at a wealth management firm. He had grown up in Phoenix, went to school in Boston, and moved back home 3 years ago to be close to his parents. He asked what I taught, and when I said middle school science, his face lit up the way most people's faces did not when I said that. That's the most important age, he said. That's when kids decide if they're curious about the world or not. You're shaping that. I know how ridiculous it sounds now, but no one had ever said anything like that to me about my job. Most people smiled politely and changed the subject. We talked until the party ended. He texted me that same night just to say he'd had a wonderful time. We had our first date 4 days later at a small Italian place he'd chosen specifically because he remembered me mentioning, in passing, that I loved pasta but hated pretentious restaurants. I thought, this man listens. I should have paid more attention to what he was listening for. The courtship was the most wonderful 8 months of my life. Daniel was attentive in ways that felt almost cinematic. He remembered every small thing I mentioned. He brought coffee to my classroom on mornings he knew I had parent-teacher conferences. He drove 2 hours to sit in the back row of my brother's community theatre performance because he knew it would mean everything to me. When I was sick with the flu for a week, he brought soup every evening and sat beside me on the couch watching old nature documentaries, even though he'd told me he found them boring. He proposed on a Tuesday. Not a special occasion, no big production. We were hiking a trail we'd done a dozen times, and he stopped at the overlook where we'd had our first real conversation about whether we wanted children, and he said he'd been thinking about that conversation every day since. He pulled a ring from his jacket pocket, simple, elegant, exactly what I would have chosen, and asked me to spend my life with him. I said yes before he finished the sentence. We were married 10 months later, small ceremony, just family and close friends, at a garden venue outside the city. My mother cried. My brother gave a toast that made everyone laugh and then cry. Daniel's parents danced together all night like newlyweds. I stood in the middle of it all thinking I had somehow gotten everything right. The changes were so gradual that I couldn't have told you when they started. That's the thing no one explains about this kind of relationship. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with warning signs posted on the door. It seeps in like water through a foundation crack, slow, quiet, and by the time you notice the damage, it's already structural. The first thing I noticed was the commentary about my appearance. Not cruel at first, just instructive. You might want to try a different colour on your lips, babe. That shade washes you out. Or, I noticed you've been wearing your hair up a lot. I really prefer it down. You look more like yourself that way. I adjusted. I thought I was being a considerate partner. I thought he was sharing preferences the way couples do. Then came the commentary about my friends. My best friend had been my closest companion since our freshman year of college. She was loud and irreverent and laughed at everything, including herself, and she had talked me through every hard thing that had ever happened to me. Daniel decided, somewhere in our second year of marriage, that she was a bad influence. "She's always encouraging you to drink more than you should," he said once after I came home from a girls' night. "She doesn't respect that you're married now. Women like that, they can't stand to see their friends happy." I defended her. But the next time she invited me out, I hesitated. And the time after that, I made an excuse. The isolation wasn't dramatic. It was just a slow accumulation of friction until it became easier to stay home than to navigate Daniel's mood afterward. His colleagues became a fixture in our lives the way my friends stopped being one. 3 men from the firm, his work wife, as I privately called one of them, a woman named Brooke, who laughed at everything Daniel said and had the specific talent of making me feel invisible in my own kitchen. They came for dinners that I cooked and parties that I organised and gatherings where my role was essentially to smile and refill glasses and not say anything that might make Daniel look bad in front of people whose opinions he cared about. "You talked over Greg tonight," he told me, after one dinner, his voice pleasant and even. "He was in the middle of a point, and you interrupted him. These are important relationships for my career, Claire. I need you to understand that." I hadn't interrupted Greg. Greg had paused to take a sip of water, but I apologised. That's what I had learned to do. Apologise first, question later, question quietly, never question twice. The physical part started the way it always does in these stories, a grab that was too hard, explained away as stress, a shove that sent me stumbling backward, explained away as my fault for standing in the wrong place at the wrong moment. An incident in our kitchen 18 months into the marriage, where he slammed my hand against the counter and told me to stop acting hysterical, and I spent the rest of the week convinced I had somehow provoked it. I didn't tell anyone. I had learned by then that my husband had a gift for making me doubt my own memory. If I told someone, I would have to explain it, and explaining it meant hearing it out loud, and hearing it out loud might make it real. I was very committed, for a very long time, to not making it real. The night of the firm's anniversary gala was supposed to be a good night. Daniel had been in a pleasant mood all week. He'd brought me flowers on Wednesday for no reason, which I had learned to recognise as a weather system the calm before, but I chose to believe it was just kindness. I wore a navy dress I'd bought specifically for the event, had my hair professionally styled, arrived on his arm smiling. For the first hour, everything was fine. Then I made the mistake of mentioning, in conversation with Daniel's managing partner and his wife, that I had recently started taking graduate school prerequisites online. I was thinking about going back for a master's in environmental science. I had been thinking about it quietly for months, saying nothing to Daniel because I already knew what he would say. The managing partner's wife thought it was wonderful. She asked questions. I answered them, animated for the first time all evening. I didn't see Daniel's expression change. I only felt it later, in the car, when his whole demeanour shifted like a door closing. "You want to embarrass me," he said, his voice tight and low. "You announced to Robert and his wife that you're not satisfied with our life. That being my wife isn't enough for you." "That's not what I said." "Don't," he cut me off. "Don't explain it to me like I'm one of your students." We drove in silence for 20 minutes. I was calculating the way I always calculated how bad tonight was going to be. Whether I should say something or stay quiet. Whether staying quiet would make it worse. Whether nothing I chose would matter because the outcome had already been decided. He pulled into a strip mall parking lot in a part of Scottsdale I didn't recognise. Gas station, dollar store, a nail salon with its lights already off. Not our neighbourhood. Not anywhere near our neighbourhood. "Get out," he said. I looked at him. "What?" "I need to drive. Get out of the car." "Daniel, it's 11 o'clock at night." "Get out." I got out. I stood on the concrete in my heels and my navy dress, and I watched his headlights disappear around the corner. My phone was in my small evening bag. I had 43% battery. I was 12 miles from home. He texted me at 11:47 p.m. Just an address, a rideshare pickup spot 3 blocks away, like I was a package he'd ordered to be collected. I stood under the yellow light of that gas station awning, and I was not afraid. I was not even angry. I was done. What Daniel didn't know, what he had never bothered to learn in 6 years of marriage, was that I am, at my core, a scientist. I observe, I document, I form hypotheses, and I test them. And I had been for the past 4 months running the most important experiment of my life. It started because of Brooke. I had never liked her, but I had never examined why beyond the obvious professional jealousy. Then, 8 months ago, I found a receipt in Daniel's jacket pocket while taking it to the dry cleaner, a hotel receipt. One night, a hotel in Sedona, 2 months before our anniversary. Daniel had told me that weekend he was at a conference in Dallas. I did not confront him. A younger version of me, the version who still believed that honesty would be rewarded in this marriage, might have. Instead, I took a photograph of the receipt on my phone, put it back in his pocket, and dropped the jacket off at the cleaner. Then I started paying attention in a different way. My brother is a paralegal at a family law firm. He had been asking me for 2 years, carefully and without pressure, whether I was okay, whether things were good at home. I had always said yes. When I called him on a Thursday afternoon in June, asked him to meet me for lunch without telling Daniel, and showed him what I'd found, he didn't say "I told you so." He just asked me what I needed. What I needed, it turned out, was his boss. The attorney was a small, precise woman who wore reading glasses on a chain and spoke in complete sentences even when thinking out loud. She specialized in high-conflict divorce cases and had, my brother told me, a reputation for leaving nothing on the table. I met her in her office on a Monday when Daniel thought I was at a yoga class I'd invented 6 weeks earlier, specifically for occasions like this. "The financial situation is going to be the complicated part," she told me. "When one spouse controls all the accounts, they often move assets when they sense a divorce coming. We need to document everything before he has any idea." She connected me with a forensic accountant, a quiet man with reading glasses and a coffee-stained keyboard who could, apparently, find money that people had spent years hiding. Over the next 3 months, he found quite a lot of it. Meanwhile, I started wearing a small digital recorder to every conversation that mattered. It clipped to the inside of my bra and was the size of a lip balm. My attorney had coached me carefully on what was and wasn't admissible in Arizona. I recorded Daniel threatening me in the kitchen. I recorded him telling his friend on the phone that his wife had become a liability. I recorded him, one terrible Tuesday evening, telling me that if I ever tried to leave, I would leave with nothing because he had made sure of it. He had, in fact, made sure of quite a lot of things. The forensic accountant found 3 accounts Daniel had opened in a subsidiary of the firm he technically co-owned. Nearly $400,000, moved slowly and carefully over 5 years. He found the payments to Brooke not a colleague, it turned out, but a contractor paid from a personal account. He found the life insurance policy Daniel had increased 8 months ago, the one naming his parents as secondary beneficiaries, with a clause that paid double in the event of accidental death. I read that last part sitting in my car in the school parking lot during my lunch break, and I held the paper in my hands until they stopped shaking. The night he left me in that strip mall parking lot, the night I stood under the gas station lights and watched his taillights disappear, I was not 12 miles from home. And stranded. I was 1 phone call from my attorney and 48 hours from the most important moment of my life. I had planned for this. Not this specific moment, he had surprised me with the location, but I had planned for a moment exactly like it. I called my brother. He picked up on the second ring. "It's time," I said. He was there in 20 minutes. The next morning, Daniel came downstairs to find me in the kitchen drinking coffee, dressed for work, apparently unbothered. He looked at me with the particular expression of a man trying to determine whether he'd gotten away with something. I handed him a mug, asked if he wanted eggs, and watched him visibly relax. "About last night," he started. "It's fine," I said pleasantly. I overreacted. He nodded. He sat down. He ate the eggs I made him. He kissed me on the cheek before he left for work. I waited until I heard the garage door close. Then I finished my coffee, rinsed my mug, and sent a single text to my attorney. Today. What happened next took 6 hours, most of which I spent at my brother's house grading papers and trying not to look at my phone every 30 seconds. My attorney and her team filed for divorce. The forensic accountant submitted his findings to the court. The recordings I had made over 4 months were delivered to the family court judge with a formal request for an emergency protective order and an asset freeze on all accounts connected to my husband. A separate filing went to the Arizona Department of Financial Institutions regarding the hidden accounts, and a copy of everything, the recordings, the financial documents, the hotel receipt, and the life insurance paperwork, was delivered by courier to Daniel's managing partner at the firm. I had not simply been building a divorce case. I had been building a case. Daniel came home to an empty house. I had moved my essential belongings 4 days earlier, a carful at a time, while he was at work. What I left behind, besides the furniture, was a single envelope on the kitchen counter, in the spot where I always put his mail. He called my cell phone 11 times in the first hour. I watched the screen light up from across my brother's kitchen table, not answering. On the 12th call, I picked up. He started with confusion, then moved quickly to anger, then to something I had never quite heard from him before, a thin, high thread of panic underneath the rage. "Where are you? What did you do? Claire, you need to come home right now and explain." "The envelope on the counter explains everything," I said. "I recommend you read it before you make any more calls." You're going to want to call an attorney," I said. "Not the one the firm uses. A personal attorney, tonight." I hung up. The envelope contained a letter I had written over the course of 3 weeks, revised 14 times, and finally printed on a Wednesday morning while Daniel was at the gym. It was not an emotional letter. I had made a deliberate choice to keep it factual. It listed, in precise terms, what I knew, what had been documented, what had been filed, and with whom. It explained the asset freeze and what it meant for his access to those 3 hidden accounts. It referenced the recordings and noted the specific dates and what had been captured on each one. It mentioned the insurance policy and stated clearly that a copy had been provided to my attorney, my brother, the court, and the firm's managing partner. The last paragraph was the only one I had written for myself, rather than for the record. "You spent 6 years making me feel small, and you were so confident in that project that you never once considered I might be paying attention. I was paying attention to everything." The divorce proceedings lasted 4 months. Daniel hired an aggressive attorney who spent the first 6 weeks attempting to discredit the recordings, challenge the forensic accountant's methodology, and suggest that I had manufactured evidence in a scheme to extort my husband. The judge was not impressed. The recordings were clear. The financial records were airtight. The hotel receipts and the documentation of Brooks' payments told a story that his attorney could not convincingly revise. The managing partner of the firm, who had been shown everything on the day I filed, had already begun his own internal investigation and cooperated fully with the court's requests. Daniel's attorney pivoted to the asset division, arguing that the hidden accounts represented legitimate business holdings. The forensic accountant spent 2 hours on the stand explaining, in language that seemed deliberately calibrated to be understood by anyone without a finance background, why that argument was incorrect. I watched Daniel's jaw tighten from across the courtroom as each point landed. The life insurance policy came up during the protective order hearing. My attorney presented it alongside a timeline of the escalating physical incidents and the recorded threat Daniel had made about ensuring I would leave with nothing. The judge granted the protective order that afternoon. Daniel was required to vacate a friend's home and move to a hotel while the proceedings continued. My mother drove from Tucson and sat beside me in the courtroom the day the final judgment was issued. She held my hand through the reading, and I felt her grip tighten at certain points: the financial penalty, the ruling on the hidden accounts, the 5-year no-contact protective order. When it was over, she turned to look at me, and her eyes were wet. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked. Not accusatory, just wanting to understand. "I was gathering evidence," I said. She laughed, which surprised both of us. And then she hugged me, so hard. I could feel her shaking. The managing partner terminated Daniel from the firm the week after the financial investigation concluded. The Arizona Department of Financial Institutions launched a formal inquiry into the hidden accounts and their origin. His professional license is currently under review. Brooke no longer works at the firm either, a coincidence that I find deeply uninteresting but noted nonetheless. I went back to teaching in September. My students are currently working on a unit about ecosystems and interdependence. Last week, one of my 8th graders, a quiet girl who sits in the back and asks questions that make me stop and actually think, raised her hand and asked why decomposers were important. Because nothing new grows without them, I told her. They break down what's dead so the living things have somewhere to start. She wrote it down like it mattered. I have started the online prerequisites for my master's program. Environmental science, same as I'd mentioned at the gala dinner that started the final chapter of my marriage. Daniel had heard that conversation as an act of rebellion, as evidence of my ingratitude. What it actually was the first time in years I had allowed myself to think out loud about what I wanted. I think about that a lot now, how long I spent making myself smaller so he would feel bigger, and how the smallness never actually helped. He didn't become less angry because I became less visible. He became more certain that I could be treated any way he chose. The voice recorder lives in a drawer in my brother's guest room, which is my room now until I find my own apartment in the spring. I kept it because I am not entirely sure why, some impulse toward documentation that I suppose I've had since I was a girl who wanted to be a scientist. My attorney suggested I throw it away and move on. I'm not quite ready to move on yet, but I'm ready for everything else. There is a particular kind of quiet that comes after years of living inside someone else's anger, a quiet that you don't fully trust at first because it has always meant something was about to happen. I wake up some mornings in my brother's guest room and I lie there waiting for the shoe to drop, for a door to slam, for a voice to cut through the silence with a verdict about who I am and what I'm worth. And then I remember, I documented that verdict. I sent it to the courts. I sent it to the firm. I sent it to the man in the reading glasses who turned it into numbers on a balance sheet that a judge signed off on. And then I got up, made coffee, and drove to school to teach 30 kids that the world is stranger and more complicated and more interesting than they currently have the context to understand. That is the part he never saw coming. Not the recordings, not the forensic accountant, not even the letter on the counter. He never saw coming that I had been paying attention all along.